Update, and I want to update you on Hurricane Erika, 2 p.m. Atlantic Standard Time. Here's the latest. 16.9 north, 58.5 west. That is 250 miles east of Antigua. Top sustained winds, minimal hurricane force, 75 miles per hour, moving off west-northwest at 14. There's the pressure, 989 from the latest Hurricane Hunter reconnaissance aircraft. I believe that plane is taken off and heading back. Another one will undoubtedly be out there in a little bit to see what else is happening. Hurricane warnings out St. Martin all the way down to Antigua and all the islands in between. Likewise, Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, British and American Virgin Islands, under hurricane watch. Also, tropical storm warnings out from Guadalupe down to Dominica. Here's our satellite picture, and what do we see going on? There appears to be a couple different things here. First of all, notice the huge area of red. That is shrinking some, so we're seeing a couple things happening. First of all, the cloud tops are warming, saying maybe a slight weakening. Not really, maybe slightly, but overall around the core or center of circulation, deep red. That is a flare-up of very intense convection there. So we believe that this hurricane is probably steady state. It's not changing very much at the present time. And we saw the pressure at 990 millibars earlier, now 989 millibars, essentially the same thing. So we think this hurricane is undergoing very little change at the present time. And aloft, a beautiful anticyclone here. You can see just the presence of these cirrus clouds here, that conditions continue to be somewhat favorable for development. Now here's Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands right over through here, and we have Guadalupe right here. Center of circulation remains down this part of the hurricane. It continues off the west-northwest. That is going to take the center of circulation very close to the islands or just north of the islands, essentially what we were looking at yesterday. But for an area to get hurricane force winds, it does not have to be exactly over that center of circulation. So if it's even close by, of course you have to be prepared for that. Presently, our visible satellite picture showing actually quite a few fair skies across Puerto Rico, all the way back across the Leeward and the Windward Islands. And it almost appears that there's not even anything out there in a way. It almost looks that way. But very compact hurricane right here. Here's Guadalupe right here. You can see Anguilla off to the north. British, U.S. Virgin Islands here. Here's Puerto Rico, San Juan. Right now this track is pretty much steady state, and the forecast track continues to take it just to the northeast of the islands. But one thing we'd like to be able to point out, which is maybe a sliver of good news here, center of circulation in this area, look how much of the weather is going on off to the north, to the south. Not that much. So that is some great news to be able to tell you. Assuming that there's not a huge change here, we have low clouds that you can see there, but the very heavy showers, deep convection, is over the center and shifted off to the north and back to the east. So let's hope it stays that way until it moves away from the islands. Well, here's a look a little bit forward.
Named storm since July. Our quiet season has turned a little more active as we are just about to the peak of the hurricane season. And joining me today to discuss the threat of Hurricane Erika is our own hurricane specialist, John Hope. John, we've seen the latest update, no increase in strength on Erika. We'll wait until 5 o'clock Eastern time to get the next update. Do we anticipate any big changes today?
I don't think so. I don't see much of any change. I think it'll be just about the same. It's certainly the Leeward Islands are immediately threatened, though it's not very far from there now. And then the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico off not very far to the west. They just have out a hurricane watch, but that could be changed to a warning.
Okay, British Virgin Islands, U.S. Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico sort of on standby right now. Let us show you the latest here. This is the 2 p.m. update again, centered 16.9 north, 58.5 west. It's closer now to the islands, only 215 miles east of Antigua with winds of 75 miles per hour. Motion has been about the same through the day, west-northwest at 14, and pressure has dropped a little bit. And John, it was reconnaissance that got us this latest pressure drop.
Yes, that was the first time we had a reconnaissance aircraft actually in the storm, Jill. We got out there early this morning. We got about 3 fixes before they left. Now, we won't have another one in there for a little while. But it did show us that we had a hurricane, and we learned that. We found out exactly what the pressure was. Get very accurate and precise information from the Hurricane Hunter aircraft. Those are the Air Force Reserve folks that fly out of Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi.
Right, and they'll be back in to give us more information a little later on.
They'll be in there, in and out all the time from now on. It'll be monitored more or less around the clock.
Okay. We do have hurricane watches and warnings. As mentioned, the watches for the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. Warnings from St. Martin to Antigua. That includes Barbuda, and we should mention the difference, John, between a hurricane watch and a warning.
Well, a watch means that hurricane conditions are possible in the watch area within the next 36 hours, and hurricane conditions are expected when you have hurricane warnings. So folks in the islands that are under hurricane warnings now, they need to assume anyway that they might get full hurricane force winds. They don't want to try to outguess it and say, well, it's going to go 10 miles north, or and maybe we won't get so much. If you're under hurricane warning, you have to assume that you might indeed get hurricane conditions.
Okay, and also we do have tropical storm warnings for Guadeloupe and Dominica. Satellite picture here will show us just how close this hurricane is to the islands. John, right at the moment we've been checking winds, maybe 10 to 15 miles per hour, and maybe a few thin high clouds coming over.
Those are just beginning to shift around to the northeast as they normally do when a hurricane approaches. As you say, they are pretty light. There are some high, thin cirrus clouds up about 25 or 30,000 feet coming in there now. Okay. And the pressure is falling. I wanted to point that out. There's been about a 3 millibar pressure fall in the last 24 hours.
Okay, well, I want to get a quick look at the map here so people can kind of get their bearings. Again, the watches are in effect for this area, and the islands like St. Martin, Barbuda, Antigua that kind of stick out there the farthest to the northeast do have the hurricane warnings, and this hurricane track should come close enough, John, that they could see hurricane force winds during the day tomorrow, I believe.
Yeah, tomorrow morning, beginning early tomorrow morning will be the critical time because it should be making its closest pass anyway to the lures at about that time.
And being south of the track of the hurricane, they will, if the best news is, get the lighter winds to the northeast or north side of the track where the stronger winds would be.
That's correct, but again, you know, we can't be quite sure whether this track is going to be like that or like this. You know, that's about as good as the science is. So you have to be very careful about latching onto that track and say this is exactly where the center is going to go, because there is some deviation either side of the track on the average.
And we've seen that a lot with past hurricanes. All right, the infrared satellite picture here, does this tell you anything different than the visible?
No, it doesn't. I have seen, you know, we have a lot of what we call diurnal effects sometimes in a hurricane. The brightness of these clouds kind of comes and goes, and I don't see any change in the overall structure. It has a very well-developed outflow here. We can see this this clockwise rotation of those cirrus clouds. So it has good outflow established, and that should mean, or could mean anyway, that it could strengthen some.
Okay, thank you, John Hope, our hurricane specialist. We'll be checking back with John.
Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about what's happening in the tropics. Of course, the big development today is the upgrading of our tropical storm to a hurricane as of the late morning advisory. Hurricane Erika, as you can see, there are the coordinates as of 5 p.m. Atlantic Standard Time, 180 miles east of Antigua. You'll notice the winds, sustained winds at 75 miles per hour. So in terms of the overall maximum sustained winds, a minimal hurricane. West-northwest at 13 miles per hour, and the estimate pressure 29.21 inches or 989 millibars. Now we'll have additional recon information as we head into this evening, and reconnaissance is a very vital part to trying to ascertain, first of all, the structure of this particular tropical system, and then to also aid in the process of trying to determine exactly how the system will play itself out in the short term. We know from at least historical attempts at forecasting tropical weather systems, their changes in intensity and their motion, their path, it gets very, very difficult, especially beyond 36 to 48 hours, but a lot of progress certainly has been made in the last 20 years or so, and we do expect additional progress as we head on now down the road in the next 10 years, especially a lot of additional information coming from the research aircraft. The new airplane flying at very high altitudes is able to zip in and around these tropical systems and especially get a good sense of what the surrounding environment is, because then we can get a good idea of how these tropical systems interact with the surrounding atmosphere. Now, having said all that, let's give you the particulars. Hurricane warning in effect from St. Martin heading south along the northern Leeward to Antigua, and you can see we do have Puerto Rico, the U.S. and the British Virgin Islands under a hurricane watch. Tropical storm warnings continue in effect from Guadeloupe heading south towards Dominica. And you can see, again, here is our hurricane. Here's the tropical storm warning. And on the satellite imagery, the infrared, the colorized version, shows us a fairly significant increase in upward motion that's occurring pretty close or perhaps a bit farther north of the actual low-level center. And one thing we've noticed is the flow of air outwards, or what we call the outflow, looks fairly impressive here, especially on the northwest and heading over towards the northeastern side of the actual hurricane. Visible satellite view late this afternoon, you can see where that area of convection develops and intensifies. It almost looks like a pancake when you drop it on the griddle here. You see that circular blob of bright white. Those are the tops of some of the precipitation areas underneath that are moving up into the atmosphere and then expanding. Now, the overall wind pattern set up with the system shows the strongest wind still located northeast of the actual center. That relationship is expected to continue through this evening, and hopefully with the projected track heading just to the north edge of the islands, the south and southwestern sides of the circulation of the hurricane will be the part of the system that affects the islands, and with that in mind, we shouldn't see the worst of it. However,
the Weather Channel. No place on Earth has better weather.
Well, the big news in our tropical update is that we have a hurricane, Hurricane Erika. And here is the latest information as of 5 p.m. Atlantic Standard Time, and that's also the same as Eastern Standard Time. It's now centered 17.1 north and 59.0 west, 180 miles east of Antigua. And the winds are still at 75 miles per hour, so it's holding its own today. Moving west-northwest at 13 miles per hour, and there you have the estimated pressure at 989 millibars. Now, we do have the tropical storm warnings in effect from Guadalupe to Dominica, and I believe we have hurricane watches and warnings in effect farther to the north from there too. So we'll keep you posted as far as that goes. Now, I want to show you the satellite vantage point as it rolls into motion, and we are going to be watching very closely what occurs with Hurricane Erika. Now, last night and yesterday, most of the convection was to the north and east of the center of circulation, but obviously that has not been the case today. We've seen more convection around the center of circulation as it continues to churn on off towards the west-northwest, and that is a sign of strengthening. And well, it's holding its own today. Winds have been at 75 miles per hour ever since about 11 o'clock this morning when it became, or when it was named, a hurricane by the National Hurricane Center. So we are a little concerned as to what kind of effect it will have on the Virgin Islands as well as Guadalupe and the Dominican Republic, and we will wait and see. We are anticipating the possibility of obviously the high seas and also the gusty winds, depending on how closely Hurricane Erika passes by those islands. As you know, it's very important to just monitor the situation very closely and see what is going to be happening. Here's an excellent satellite vantage point of our hurricane, Hurricane Erika, and our expert, John Hope, was talking about that in the last couple of hours we have seen a little bit of a blow up near the center of circulation here with the convection. Whether or not that is a sign of intensification remains to be seen. We'll have to see if that persists. But certainly that is something that we have been noticing. And yesterday you might have noticed that we saw a lot more shearing going on with the westerly winds. That has not been the case today. We do not see that as strongly evident as we saw yesterday. So going to keep a close watch on what's happening with Hurricane Erika. Otherwise, this is what else is going on across the country. We do have that trough in the east that has moved on through. This is the old frontal boundary. We'll watch that. Sometimes tropical development does occur along an old frontal boundary in the Gulf of Mexico or even the Atlantic, so we'll have to watch that very closely. And we have what appears to be a little disturbed area here in the Bay of Campeche. We'll keep an eye on that. And of course, we have a couple of tropical waves that have moved off of the coast of Africa that we're going to be watching very, very closely. Now, let's take you to the coast of Africa and talk about the showers and thunder showers in association with these tropical waves that are moving right off of the coast. And basically, we're going to watch them, monitor the situation for further development. This is a better view of what's going on with Hurricane Erika as it continues to churn. And as I mentioned, past couple of hours, we've seen that little bit of a flare up there near the center of circulation. We'll have to wait and see if indeed that does persist. Here's our old frontal boundary. And here's a little bit of a flare-up in the Bay of Campeche near the Gulf of Mexico. Will this trough act as a steering current and kind of help to recurve Hurricane Erika away from the lower 48? That remains to be seen. We'll have to wait and see. You may want to tune back in later on this weekend and certainly in the early part of next week to see if anything is going to be happening. There we have a close watch on the Yucatan Peninsula as well as the Caribbean and the Bay of Campeche. We're going to watch this area of convection for possible development. Tropical Storm Kevin is moving out over open waters. It's now about 787 miles west-southwest of Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. Winds are at 50 miles per hour. It's moving west at 13 miles per hour. It is scheduled to move over colder open waters, emphasis on the open waters, and colder, I guess, actually, too, because it's not going to affect land, and it will probably be diminishing in intensity very, very soon as it gets over those colder waters. And that's another bird's eye view of what's happening with Tropical Storm Kevin. Now, we do have Tropical Storm Oliva. It was... Hurricane watches and warnings are out in the Lesser Antilles as Hurricane Erika makes its way across the Atlantic. We're going to turn things over to Rich Johnson in the Forecast Center for the latest.
All right, thank you, Janetta. We are here in the Forecast Center. We continue to follow Hurricane Erika. Joining me right now is John Hope. He's our hurricane expert here at the Weather Channel. John, give us the latest that you see within the past several hours with the hurricane.
I haven't seen a lot of change. The satellite picture is looking a little bit more interesting. We'll talk about that in just a second. We're awaiting a reconnaissance report. The last one we have is about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the Eastern time. There's a plane on the way now, one of the Hurricane Hunter planes that took off from St. Croix just a little while ago, and they will be in the center of the hurricane at about 8 o'clock or a little bit after Eastern time or Atlantic Standard Time.
Can you tell us a little bit about why, John, that there's a break in information from a hurricane reconnaissance aircraft? One goes in, then we have to wait.
The way they're normally set up, each aircraft that goes out there is responsible for getting 2 fixes, and traditionally say they take off in the morning, they will get us a fix at about 8 o'clock in the morning, and again say between 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then that plane is unable to stay out there any longer. So another one goes out, that one gets out there about 8 o'clock in the evening, and they'll get another fix about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning before they leave. In the meantime, while they're out there, they go in and out of the storm several times. It's not just one fix. They give us several fixes of where the eye of the storm is, and they give us all the information about it, you know, how strong the winds are, how low the pressure is.
Okay, let's take a look at that latest information as of 5 p.m. Again, we should be receiving a new advisory rather soon. As of 5 p.m., 17-1 north, 59-0 west, that is where Hurricane Erika is centered. That is about 180 miles east of Antigua. Top sustained winds, minimal Category 1 on the Saffir-Simpson scale of 75. It is moving west-northwest at 13 miles per hour. This direction and speed has changed very little today. That is not estimated pressure. That was a pressure measured from the Hurricane Hunter earlier today at 29.21 and 989 millibars. This is what we're looking at, a little bit of geography. We want to refresh your mind of exactly where all the islands are. And of course, the Leeward Islands up in this area here, and of course, we're also concerned about Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Hurricane watches currently are posted from Puerto Rico all the way over toward the Virgin Islands, as well as St. Martin, all the way down toward Antigua, now under warnings. But John, there's a little bit of a difference here. We have some tropical storm warnings up from Guadalupe to Dominica. Why is that?
And their tropical storm warnings are expected there because these islands are going to be south of where the eye of the hurricane passes, and the winds will be lighter there. These islands will have a wind from the west as the center of the hurricane passes to the north, and there will be lighter winds, and therefore not expecting hurricane force winds, but tropical storm force winds, which simply means winds of more than 39 miles per hour, but not hurricane.
We haven't talked a whole lot today about storm surge. What kind of tides could we see a little bit above normal, or some of the rainfall?
It certainly will be above normal, 3 or 4 feet. Sometimes around the islands, Rich, you don't get quite as high a storm surge as you would get on the continent. And one reason for that is that the water can run around the islands, and on a long stretch of coast on the continent, the water can't run around it. It's got to go up onto the beaches.
Okay, here's our satellite photograph, the big picture showing exactly what we have going on here. Again, here's our hurricane, this area here, and here's South Florida, just to point out where the U.S. coast is. Is there any threat at all to the U.S. mainland?
Well, Rich, as you can see, this is a very long way from South Florida or any place else in the United States. And we don't think there'll be any possible danger to the United States until well into the week. It is most likely, from what we're looking at now, for this hurricane to begin to turn more toward the north out here in the Atlantic someplace before it would get as far as the U.S. But we wouldn't ever say no danger as long as the hurricane is still out there, because as you know, they can do some strange things. Right now, we think we're confident about the west-northwest path for about the next 24 to 36 hours at least. and then it's a little more iffy. We think it'll begin to nudge a little bit more to the north after that.
John, briefly, our satellite picture here shows some deep reds here. Here are the islands. What can the islands expect over the next 6 hours?
Well, the islands in the Leeward Islands, they're just about, they're already starting to get some rain. Antigua's had some rain. By tomorrow morning, it'll be heavy rain and gusty winds, and by early in the morning, the center of the hurricane will just about make its closest pass to the northern Leeward Islands, so they need to be ready.
All right, thank you, John. Again, that's John Hope.
And that story tops this edition of Weather Scope. I'm Sharon Resulton. Hurricane warnings and watches have been issued for the Lesser Antilles. Jeff Morrow is standing by in our forecast center with the very latest. Jeff?
Thanks, Sharon. We continue to track minimal hurricane right now, Hurricane Erika, as it approaches the northeast Leeward Islands. And it is showing some signs of maybe getting even a bit better organized again this evening. Let's show you the particulars. This is a brand new advisory from the Hurricane Center as of 8 p.m. 17.5 north, 59.6 west, centering the hurricane about 145 miles east of Antigua. Winds at 75 miles per hour. That's a Category 1, moving west-northwest at 13. And the pressure that we have here is, as of the last reconnaissance, which was way back at about 2 this afternoon, there is a plane out there now. We'll be getting some new information very shortly. Quickly, I want to go over where the watches and warnings are out. For Puerto Rico and the U.S. and British Virgin Islands, there are a hurricane watch out at the present time. There is a hurricane warnings in effect for the Leeward Islands from Antigua to Montserrat, northwestward through St. Martin, and a tropical storm warning remains in effect there for Guadeloupe and Dominica. And just to go over very quickly, a hurricane watch means hurricane conditions are possible in the watch area within 36 hours, and warning meaning 24 hours or less. Joining me now in the forecast center is senior meteorologist Stu Ostro. Stu, we were talking about this storm last night. Now a hurricane appears to be getting better organized, and it's doing that again tonight.
That's right. We have seen a flare-up in the convection, the deeper rain clouds. Actually, it decreased a bit during the day today. Now it's coming back, so you have to smooth out some of those fluctuations. Overall, the intensity has remained about the same during the course of the day, but we'll be watching this new flare very closely this evening, also awaiting the report from the hurricane hunters.
All right, let's go and give the folks the latest on the particulars once again. Stu, comment a little bit about the track and where it may be headed here.
Well, Jeff, even though we saw a little deviation to the northwest a couple evenings ago, and then for a while early yesterday, a little jog to the west, by and large, if you eliminate that one yellow dot right there, it's pretty much followed this west-northwest track since it became a tropical depression and then a tropical storm. And although there could be some deviation each way, either north or south, and of course any little deviation would be critical as far as the effects on these islands here, we don't expect any dramatic turns either to the north or to the southwest right away anyway.
All right, let's take a look at the satellite. This is an infrared picture, and again, we're seeing a pretty big flare-up of thunderstorms now on the south side of this hurricane.
That's right. Up until this evening, a lot of these brighter yellows and oranges throughout the course of the history of the storm and now hurricane have been over on the eastern semicircle of the storm. Now we're seeing it a little more near the center and off to the southwest. Still not terribly symmetric, but we do see nice outflow. These high clouds are just sort of spiraling out in all directions, indicating that it is at least fairly well organized.
Looks like some of the Leeward Islands right in here starting to maybe get some of the cloudiness and maybe even a few rain bands coming in the next few hours.
Yeah, right now they're just starting to see some of these high clouds thicken up. It was actually a pretty nice day in most of the islands today. Now some clouds coming in, and the heavier weather now not too far offshore, right underneath these oranges and yellows.
All right, quickly, let's talk a little bit about the future track here. Now, again, this is very speculative because of the noted erratic nature of some hurricanes, but what can you tell us about maybe its future?
Well, we've seen this big dip in the winds aloft that helped bring the strong cold front and cool air into the east. That's going to lift out, but then this next system in here is going to come down the pike, do something similar. After that, the ridge may build a little bit, but it still may have enough of an influence to steer the hurricane away from the coast. We need to watch that over the next few days. Plenty of time to worry about that. It would be middle of next week before it would threaten the mainland United States, if it ever does.
So, the Leeward Islands here, if they're going to experience hurricane force conditions, when might that be?
That would be probably not over the next few hours, it'd be more into the day Saturday.
All right. Well, thank you, Stu Ostro. Again, Stu will be with us here throughout the evening, keeping us updated, giving us some insight on Hurricane Erika. Right now, let's go back.
Yeah, hurricane force winds 74 miles per hour or higher in this orange area to the northeast of the center. The islands themselves have generally had light winds this evening, 10, maybe 20 miles per hour. Some of the stronger winds, the tropical storm force winds of 39, 40 miles per hour or higher, are getting a little closer now.
All right, and a last look at a satellite.
Very latest on Hurricane Erika, and let's show you the latest coordinates as of 11 o'clock Atlantic Standard Time. And if you're plotting at home, there are the coordinates. And again, we have seen a steady movement to the west-northwest throughout the day. Everything has been actually fairly consistent with our hurricane. It was upgraded to a hurricane during the late morning. It continues that west-northwestward movement. The central pressure, 990 millibars, where it's been all evening. And we're going to continue to watch for that movement as we work our way through tonight. And of course, heading on into your Saturday. Now, hurricane warnings have been established. St. Martin back down through Antigua, and within that area, that includes Montserrat, St. Kitts, Nevis. Would also include Barbuda. That was the area I was almost forgetting. And notice that hurricane watches are in effect here for the U.S. Virgin Islands on westward into Puerto Rico. There's a look at your tropical storm warnings from Guadalupe back down to Dominica. So as we continue to watch this, there are some areas that are already, no doubt, getting the tropical storm force winds. We do want to kind of differentiate the difference between a hurricane watch and a warning. Hurricane watch means that conditions are possible within the watch area in the next 36 hours. Hurricane warning means that hurricane conditions are expected in that region in the next 24 hours or less. So it's a little more imminent. There's a look from a satellite perspective, and occasionally seeing banding with this, occasionally seeing that central dense overcast, but this has kind of held its own as we work our way through the evening. Here again is Guadalupe. So there are the northeastern extent of the Lesser Antilles, and those are the areas that will be first affected. Already seeing those lower clouds moving on in and the winds picking up across that region. If you're watching from Puerto Rico, again, this isn't going to be a factor for you so much tonight, but we encourage you first thing in the morning to tune in as you want to know exactly what the track of this thing is doing. At this point, it looks like it wants to go to the north of Puerto Rico, but as you know, with tropical systems, well, we can often see a little deviation in the flight plan there, and so this thing may end up going a little bit further southward. It's just too early to tell. So we just encourage you to get a good night's sleep tonight, tune in first thing in the morning, and find out exactly what our Hurricane Erika is doing. There's a look at the profile, the wind profile. We're already seeing those tropical storm force winds extending out across the northeastern islands of the Lesser Antilles. And one more factor to consider, of course, is this or is this not going to have an effect in the lower 48. We continue to see our troughiness here. This trough is going to be lifting on out, but a couple of subsequent troughs we think will also dig across the southeast, and that would tend to steer this out to sea as it gets close enough to that trough. It's a little too early to tell exactly what's going to happen, but that is the thought plan at this point in time, and we'll continue to watch for that as we